Alrighty, everybody. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Off-Street Changemakers Club. So some of you may not have heard of that name, or this might be the first time you're hearing it. We hosted our first ever user conference this year, just after IPMI closed, and it was such a good time that we wanted to essentially open the doors for other folks in the industry, other than our clients, that are dedicated to improving the parking industry as a whole. So welcome all. We've got a really fun bit of content here for you, a great presentation, and a wonderful guest speaker here. But before we get into what's in store, I wanted to announce that we're actually going to be doing these webinars on a more regular basis. So this is technically our second, but this is our first monthly webinar that we're going to be kicking off. So each month, we're going to be tackling different topics in parking and occasionally bringing in speakers like we did today on a specific topic for those campuses out in the industry. So the hope here is that higher ed campuses can start to learn from one another in how to tackle some of these more common problems, but also some of these less common problems that parking teams face. So these webinars, they're meant to be educational. Hopefully everybody takes away something today, or you have a new way of approaching a problem that you're already tackling on campus. So first off, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Spencer. I'm with Offstreet. While I'm fairly new to the parking industry, my background is within teaching tech startups with a special emphasis on problem and solution identification. And what I found is that while finding a perfect solution to a problem is really difficult, it's sometimes harder to actually identify that problem in the first place. And sometimes there are problems that we're just not aware of until we take a finer look. So that's going to be the main focus for my bit of content today. But it's not just going to be me up here talking. We've got Taylor and Emma from my team. They'll be up here for a bit. And then Takuto, as I mentioned, he's going to be joining as well. He's the manager of business services and public safety over at Cal Poly. So today's content is not going to be about Offstreet per se, but I know that there's some folks on the call here that aren't familiar with what we do. So at Offstreet, we work with higher ed parking teams to manage departmentally sponsored guests and those attending special events on campus. And we help to take these odd permit types digital, meaning no more coupon codes at pay stations, no promo codes in apps, and no reliance on physical permits. We're web-based, meaning that there's no app to download. You don't have to create a user account. You don't have to enter in your credit card information. We integrate with law enforcement, including LPR, so that your guests can validate their parking sessions in advance of their arrival to campus, creating a seamless experience for your guests from start to finish. So you can see why this is a topic that we're kind of obsessed about. And we've worked with over 40 campuses to improve their guest experiences and their permit processes. And we'd like to share some of the things that we've learned with those 40 different campuses and initiate the conversations between each other in the industry. So here's what we're going to be covering today. We're going to dive straight into why it's important to have a positive guest experience and talk about the different groups on campus. Then we're going to go through the Parker Journey Framework, which is essentially how to assess your current systems and see some areas that you can maybe improve your systems for your guests. Then Emma's going to share some practical tips that you can apply to your campuses. And then lastly, Takuto is going to share his insights of how they do this on their campus, maintaining an extremely smooth guest experience. Feel free at any time to put questions down in the chat. You can put them in the Q&A function. We're going to have some dedicated time at the end. So feel free to put in questions for myself, Taylor, Emma, Takuto, really anybody, or we can tackle them together. But before we get into some of the further content, I want Taylor to come up here and introduce a dear friend of ours, Frank.
Awesome. Thank you for the intro, Spencer. I'm Taylor. Thank you all for joining us today. So before we get started, I want to share a story with you, a story about our friend Frank. So Frank is a department guest lecturer visiting campus for the first time. Frank is driving through campus, left hand on the steering wheel, right hand on the campus map, and his car is a stick shift too. Yikes. Where the heck is the parking lot? Frank thinks to himself. Minutes have gone by that feel like hours, and Frank is frustrated and almost rear-ended a Honda Civic while his head is on a swivel, trying to find his parking lot while referencing the map. Finally, he enters the lot and heads to the app he downloaded in advance. Frank opens the app to discover he has to create an account. Oh my God. Frantically, he creates his account, inputting all of his personal information, including the make, model, and plate number of his vehicle. With anticipation, he clicks next. Oh my God, he has to input his credit card information? I thought the department was paying for this, he thinks to himself. Reluctantly, he flicks out his credit card, fills in the information, and clicks next. Ah, there it is. Frank's internal dialogue continues. The place to input my coupon code. Real nice. Beaming with pride that the hassle is finally over, Frank realizes he now has to break Usain Bolt's record to make it to his class on time. But good thing it's only 95 degrees that day and not 100. Thank you for joining me on this story. Back to you, Spencer.
So I hope you all like Frank, first off, because he's definitely going to be a recurring character throughout this presentation. But first, we want to ask a quick question. Why should we actually care about creating a seamless parking experience for our guests? Well, it means different things for different groups. So first of all, of course, Frank himself. This is his first time coming to campus. As a guest lecturer, he's running slightly behind schedule. You can imagine how he might be feeling throughout Taylor's story. Probably not super great. And we want to ask ourselves, like, how excited would he be if he was invited back knowing that he has to endure this headache again? And guests like Frank, they come to campus for a reason, right? Like, as a guest lecturer, we can set him up for success for an amazing presentation by helping him navigate campus easily, find his final parking destination quickly, and get him registered correctly so that he doesn't have to focus on that and he can solely focus on his presentation. For parking teams, us, you guys, a smoother experience for your guests or for the department's guests means less parking requests, less citations and appeals. This means less animosity and negative feelings that go along with all of that. And handling these questions and appeals takes time and attention away from other tasks and initiatives that your team may be focused on. So I'm sure we've all had our fair share of grumpy guests, and like, frankly, no one wants to deal with that. It's not fun. Lastly, guests often aren't aware of the complexities of campus parking, and they think that they're one and the same. And a lot of times, this is often a guest's first interaction with a department or the campus, and they hold their first impression against that department or campus as a whole. Not to mention, parking teams' relationships with the departments themselves is affected by how smooth of a system that we can design for the guests. So what kind of guests? Obviously, we're not just having, a boatload of Franks appear on campus. We've got many, many different kinds of special guests that are coming that we're validating parking sessions for. So we've got events happening on campus, internal and external, and this can be anything from career fairs to athletic events to live performances. We've got new hires coming in for the departments, interviewees, Franks, VIPs, government delegates, notable alumni. We've got special interest groups like patients visiting dental clinics, hospitals, veterinary services on campus. They could be checking out art galleries or museums. We've got, some of you have restaurants on campus, cafes, bookstores. Really, the list just goes on. And obviously, one shoe is not going to fit the foot of all these different guests. So as parking teams, we need to create a system that needs to be flexible enough to work for the majority of these groups. Now, we're going to just run a quick little poll here. I want to get your take on which group your campus is struggling with the most. And as that poll is running, I'm going to continue moving on here, but please cast your vote. It should appear here shortly. So we're going to run through something called the Parker's Journey. And this is a way to assess the different groups that are coming to campus, their needs and their wants. Now, while they're all very, very different, they all sort of follow the same 6 steps when they're coming to campus. And this is what we call the Parker Journey. And we're going to keep our old pal Frank in mind for this. So first, it starts with his approach. And this is everything that's been communicated with the guest prior to heading to campus. So thinking of what Frank has and knows. Well, he knows that he doesn't have to pay for parking. They told him that. They gave him a code to use in a mobile app. That'll get him a 3 hours of free parking. So he went and downloaded the app, which is, let's be honest, more work than most guests do prior to heading for campus. And then he was told to park in an ungated lot next to the business college, which is where he's lecturing. That, and the last piece, he was given an address. So a common theme throughout this entire framework is going to be communication. But the reality is that we often play a game of telephone between the parking teams themselves, the departments, and then the end parker or the guest. So he has what he has. Whatever was able to make it through that game of telephone, now he's arrived on the edge of campus. How easy is it for Frank to actually navigate towards that ungated lot? Campuses usually have lots of points of entry and exits, but which one is ideal for Frank to go to in order to get to his destination quickly? If there's multiple lots, say a primary lot and an overflow lot, how easy is it to get from one to the other? And does Frank actually know how to get from one to the other or where both of them are located? In this instance, it was not communicated, but luckily, it's okay. There was capacity in the primary lot, so he didn't get lost. However, he was given that address, which takes him to the front doors of the business college and doesn't take him directly to the lot, as a lot of parking lots don't actually have addresses that you can go straight to. So it took him a few minutes to actually find that ungated lot that's tucked away behind the college. One more piece. He also came in through the west entrance instead of the east entrance because it wasn't communicated to him that it would be quicker that way coming through the east, which meant that he had to go through many pedestrian traffic jams, we'll call them. So it took him a little bit trying to get through a very busy campus at a busy time. Now, for his arrival, this is everything relating to the parking spot or the parking lot itself. What is capacity like? Does the guest actually know how to park? Do they need to park nose in? Does that matter? Is there LPR on campus? He doesn't necessarily need to know that, but he needs to orient his vehicle in a way that's in accordance with enforcement. Does he have a reserved stall, or is it kind of scramble parking? Is he allowed to take whatever? Is there a pay station nearby that he has to validate? And if so, where is that pay station? Quick little story, actually, this picture here in this slide. So this was actually taken not even 2 days ago in our own backyard, I'm ashamed to say, right outside of off-street headquarters. The campus here has a coupon code that guests for their events use at a pay station. And this picture is of everybody lining up to input their coupon code into said station. And it created a little bit of a jam. Now, thank God, it's been a nice sunny summer here in Canada. And it wasn't raining or negative 30 degrees like it gets in the winters. But we can imagine how this might be for a guest if they have to line up and wait for everybody else to enter in their codes in order to actually validate their sessions. Probably not great. Payment and validation. Now, this seems pretty straightforward when we think about it, but it often contains a number of steps that sponsored guests have to go through. Now, in the case of Frank, he knows that the department is covering him. He knows that he downloaded the app and he's got to, but he didn't know that he had to create a user account. He has to input his personal info, like Taylor said. He has to put in his make, model, and plate info, enter his credit card information, even though he's not actually paying. Then he has to go find this validation code that he was given in an email thread long ago. So now he's sifting through his email. These are a lot of tedious steps for Frank. And think about what this picture or what this would be like if it was at a pay station, like in the last slide. A lot of steps there as well. Now, each validation process is different for all different campuses. So I urge you to take a long, hard look at this step in particular, which includes all those tedious steps like having to go through your emails and stuff like that. So Emma's going to be touching on this in a jiffy, so I'm just going to keep moving on. Duration. This is everything to do with how long they're going to be on campus. Pretty self-explanatory. However, there are a few things to consider, like Frank, he's been given a 3-hour parking session, does not have the ability to extend his parking session. Now, that might work for him, but it might not work for other guests. Maybe they need a little bit more flexibility there. Another thing to consider is how much can the the guests themselves actually move throughout the campus? Are they valid in several parking lots? Say we have somebody coming in to do an assessment on fire suppression systems in a number of buildings. Can they actually go to different buildings and park in different lots, or are they really stuck to that one section because that's where we've set up our process, meaning they have to walk and carry their tools everywhere? Departure, parking is done, it's finished, but the experience is not. Unfortunately, Frank, he is a creature of habit, and because he didn't get any navigation instructions, he is going to exit out the west side, meaning he has to go through all those pedestrians again, rather than taking the quick, easy exit out the east side. So it's come to bite us in the butt a second time here. So taking a look at Frank's journey, we can actually go through and assign ourselves a good, an okay, and a bad score. And this slide was definitely not influenced by a traffic light, so don't accuse me of that at all. Anyways, next slide. We're going to do the same thing for Melissa. She's a dental patient coming to the dentist on campus. Kyle, he's a contractor doing some maintenance. Harold, he's an interviewee for one of the departments. And Cheryl, she's just an avid coffee goer or cafe goer, coffee lover. And she's going to be visiting one of the cafes that wants to validate her session. So seeing as we're doing this to improve our problem areas, we're going to just go ahead, give ourselves a little pat on the back for these green boxes, and then we're going to get rid of them. And now we can start to see where some trends pop out in the different steps in the journey. So it looks like we have a particularly hard time with navigation on our campus and our payment/validation setup. So we can also look at our complaints, our inquiries, and appeals that we get. And those messages will likely point us in the same direction and validate our hypothesis here. Another way that we can do this is by looking at the different groups, not vertically, but horizontally, and see if there's not a particular group that we struggle with. So it looks like we need a lot of work with our departmental guests. So now that we know roughly, how we're falling short with our validations, the next step is, what do we do about it? So Emma, why don't you take us away and talk about some practical tips here?
Perfect. Thanks, Spencer. Yeah, I think now that we have an overview of all the different touch points that a guest is going to experience, which is definitely a crucial aspect if you're going to start auditing, your guest experience areas that you can improve. The next step we want is to kind of identify any blind spots we might have. Again, no pun intended. Sometimes we try not to use parking puns and they just come out anyways, but we have to put ourselves in the shoes of the guests and try and recognize, where those blind spots might be. And so when we were looking at all of the touch points, we kind of categorized the main challenges into 3 buckets. And so the first bucket is permit issuance. So how are we issuing permits to guests? Spencer did a great job giving an overview. We totally recognize that you guys have tons of different types of guests coming to campus, and that you might not be using the same permit issuing software or process for each of them, just depending on preferences or your personal operations on campus. But either way, we kind of want to consider in the shoes of the guest, is this experience of claiming the permit or displaying the permit time consuming? Is it inconvenient? I think something to consider is that trends have changed. Consumer expectations are a lot different now than they used to be. It's the age of technology, and people expect to be able to do things from their phone. I don't even own a printer. So if I had to print a permit, I would probably be calling my mom, to be honest, but I would be pooped, and I'm definitely not proactive enough. So it's definitely something to consider when you're looking at all of the different ways that you could be issuing permits. And then the next part we're going to go into is a few ways that we recommend solving for this. So what can you do? First of all, definitely utilize virtual permits. An online registration system makes a huge difference. There's a lot of tools, whether you are going to use your mobile pay vendor, whether you're going to use a third party, whether you're doing this manually in your permit software. There's a few different options, again, depending on the type of guest and your preference, etc. But definitely look at eliminating unnecessary steps. Do guests really need to enter their make and model of their vehicle, give you both their home phone number and their cell phone number? It's just creating extra steps for them, prolonging the whole process, and just creating extra data points too that then your team needs to sort through. So we would definitely recommend really drilling down to what's important to capture. In most cases, it's probably just the license plate, maybe an email or a phone number or a code to have that extra layer of authentication. But yeah, utilizing virtual permits definitely can reduce errors and eliminate that administrative overhead that you're seeing with decals, coupon codes, etc. Or sorry, decals for our American friends. And then the second one here is when we're utilizing virtual permits, making sure that they're integrated with the other systems that we have on campus, specifically enforcement software. We don't want guests to be cited. So if those technologies aren't speaking to each other, that's a big issue. And we want to ensure that patrollers they have access to all of the information that they need. So that's permit issuance. And we recognize that, it's easy to put these into a couple of bullet points on the screen, but in actuality, implementing this is a lot harder. We just want to facilitate the conversation. And as vendors too, if you have feedback for us, like throw it in the chat, tell us what you're feeling. If you're disagreeing with anything we're saying, like tell us. We really just want to have an open conversation with you all too, the experts in campus parking. So okay, so we'll go in now to the second step. We've figured out permit issuance. Now we have to talk about communicating instructions. So this can be a really difficult thing. What we hear from clients is that you're often relying on third parties, whether it's departments or event hosts, to communicate parking information. And let's be real, people know parking. And for someone who's not involved in it day to day, it can be really difficult to communicate properly. And the implication is a bad game of telephone that results in guests being confused or cited, but either way, having a bad experience. We don't want to be telling them to park in lot A and them getting the message that there's a pointy-eared Eskimo giving a press conference. So something to think about there. I think we're all familiar with that game of telephone. And one thing we wanted to highlight is the implications. So a guest might just be confused, but that would lead to them parking in the wrong spot, not registering properly, or maybe just not registering at all because they were confused. Then they're issued a citation. They're unhappy about that. And then they're complaining, getting an overall bad impression of the campus. Maybe they're going up to like the VP level. We've heard that a lot too. So we really just want to recognize all of those opportunities where a guest could be frustrated and eliminate chances of them complaining or becoming upset. So once we figured out kind of the challenges with communication, what are a few ways that we can solve it? One of the first things is implementing a direct to guest communication. So lots of times, like we said, you're relying on third parties. Can you add some sort of instructions or text in your permit landing page or something that communicates that critical parking information to guests? So you're not relying solely on somebody else to pass that information along. The other thing you can do is send pre-session communication. And so this is more applicable for like events or times when guests would be registering in advance. Again, you kind of have to take this all with a grain of salt depending on what type of guest you're talking about or evaluating, but reminder emails and know before you go guides can be really good to ensure that guests are equipped with critical information that they need before they even leave their house. And then finally, ensuring that you're using consistent communication across all channels. So I'm not sure how many of you have this, and let me know if there's anything listed or anything that you would say consider a channel that isn't listed here. But basically, like you'll have your website, the event landing page, emails, the event host, you might have your frontline staff, the permit landing page. Like there's a lot of areas where parking information may be being communicated. And so how can you ensure that it's consistent across all of those channels? So we've talked about permit issuance, communicating instructions. Now providing directions is kind of that last third bucket. And one of the big challenges is that most guests have never been to campus before. Matt, for example, our CEO, went on a California road trip last spring and visited 6 campuses, all kind of like customers of ours. And he works in parking. He was invited by the parking team and he got lost on every campus. And he's not that far out of university, let's be real, like 10 or 12 years. And so to be getting lost as somebody who should know, I think just goes a long way in proving that, like, how can we expect somebody who has never been there before to know where they're going, or even to feel confident that they know where they're going? Even if they've read that instruction, they might still be a little bit on edge, especially if you're like trying to read a sign that's not totally clear or super big and you're driving, and like Taylor said, it's a stick shift and it's a Honda Civic and you're just like, it's a disaster. We want to avoid that. So one of the really important things is considering not only directions to the lot, but also maybe from the lot to their final destination. That's something that we're hearing conversations about with our clients, and it's a good point. Like Spencer said, the experience doesn't end when they park. So what are a few ways you can improve wayfinding on your campus? We can start by providing directions to the lot. Oh, I forgot I had that little meme in here. We're not talking about the difference between Waze and Google Maps here. They both have their own challenges. If you have a strong preference, you can start that debate in the chat, and we're, again, happy to facilitate. But either way, whatever tool you decide to use, make sure that you're providing directions for the guest on how to get to that parking lot, but then also providing, making sure that there's instructions and clear signage indicating where to park, if they can just free for all park anywhere, or if they're supposed to park in a specific space. And then third, providing those directions from the lot or space to their final destination of that facility. So at Offstreet, we're looking at a few ways that we can assist with that. Right now, you can see we screenshot our app here. We have a get directions button, and that allows parking administrators to set a custom pin at like the entry point of the lot for people to have accurate directions to where they're supposed to park. But how can we add another layer, giving them a second set of directions to get to that actual facility? So if that's something that you're struggling with, we definitely would love to chat about that. Again, use that chat. Okay, for the interest of time, I'm going to go through it quick here. Yeah, if you said throwing up a poll here, now that we've gone through all of those challenges, what do you find the most difficult to optimize for? Are you having trouble digitizing permits? Are you having trouble communicating instructions? Or are you having trouble with like the wayfinding and directions piece? So again, let us know there. I'm going to keep going quickly. But yeah, feel free to answer that. We have a guest experience audit that if you scan this, you can access free recommendations and kind of just assess where you're at based on everything that we've talked about so far. Kind of combining the Parker journey Spencer went over and all of those challenges to see, yeah, where you could improve your guest experience on your campus. So if you want to take a scan of this or a picture, feel free. We'll also put it in the chat, a link to the audit, and there'll be another slide at the end if you miss it here. But with that, I'm so excited to hand it over to Takuto and hear how Cal Poly optimizes for their guest experience on campus. So Takuto, take it away.
Thanks so much, Emma, Spencer, Taylor, the entire Offstreet team for having me today. For those of you that don't know me, which probably all of you, my name is Takuto Toshiro. I'm the manager for Public Safety Business Services here at Cal Poly. I started my career in higher education around 2019 and actually in recreational sports, but I joined public safety in August of 22. And fun fact, I actually have a part-time job, seasonal job, working at major music festivals as a peer-to-peer harm reduction team member. And the reason I mention that is because one of the core philosophies we embodied during that part-time job is all about customer service. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about how that relates to our operations. So when it comes to Cal Poly's customers, next slide, please. Yes. So when it comes to our customers, we really try to think of the entire customer profile set. So we have both internal customers as well as external customers. Cal Poly is a very complicated parking operation, I would say. We have a lot of different rules and regulations. A lot of our lots are mixed classifications, so students and staff and limited time and guests can sometimes park in our different lots. Our campus is also very challenging to navigate. It's very large. The parking lots don't necessarily correspond to the building that you might be going to. And so navigating our campus, sorry, Matt, is definitely challenging. And so we also have a lot of different guest types, meaning the actual parker, right? They might be a high profile donor, guest speakers or lecturers. They might be an unknown guest versus a known guest. Think of interview candidate versus open invite event. You don't really know who's coming. But we want to be equitable with the needs of those guests as well. If they need to park a little bit closer to our building, then we'd like to facilitate that as much as possible. But because of the fact that we have so many different external guests, we really rely on the departments that are bringing them on, the clubs that are sponsoring these events to facilitate that process for them. Yes, there are events and guests where parking services is directly managing the guest relationship and giving them all the permits they need. But for the most part, these guest speakers and lecturers, those we rely on the department that's bringing them, or the professor that's bringing them onto campus, or the student clubs. So our goal is to really make sure that both of those types of customers have a good experience. What does that look like for us? So our approach, well, first and foremost, we have a very complicated process when it comes to bringing guests onto campus. I'm going to run through that a little bit before I go through some of these bullet points. But if you're a department on campus and you're bringing somebody on, as a guest speaker or lecturer, you're going to initiate an Adobe Power Form. First of all, this is a two-step process. So it requires your signature as well as a fund approver, which can add time and lag to when it comes into our queue. Sometimes you might request something, but we don't think it's the right approach for the types of guests you're bringing. And so we then have an offline email back and forth about maybe picking a different selection and starting the form all over. We have a lot of different ways that you can bring guests onto campus, which is good and bad. It's bad because it's a little confusing for our guests, but it's good because we can really try to meet the needs of both of these customer sets. Then they have to explain how they actually redeem all of that parking or what's been done for their parking to those guests. And then Adobe Power Forms are difficult to bill off of at the end of the day because those are PDFs and we need them to be in Excel. So we have a convoluted process, and it would be great if we could limit the number, the time that it takes for this whole process to happen, and then enable and empower our internal customers. So when it comes to empowering our internal customers, those are our departments and our clubs, we thought about what our goals. Our goals, we don't want them to have to go through that long process. Can we make it easier for them to understand? And does it give them the resources for success, right? We certainly use pay station codes here on campus, and we only have about 7 of them throughout the entire campus. So it's challenging to explain to our internal customers to then explain to their guests, hey, go to this pay station because it's closest to our building, right? Another thing with pay stations goes, the internal customer doesn't have a lot of control over that. They can't really keep track of how many uses there are. If a guest accidentally uses it twice because they didn't think it went through the first time, the department's not going to know that. So they have to keep emailing us about how many more do we have, and then going through that Adobe Sign process to add more to their balance. Just a lot that they have to manage. So can we lessen the number of people that they need to depend on? And Offstreet was one of the tools that we realized could make that happen. And that brings us to, what are those tools? What tools enable them to empower and enable our external customers, right? So utilizing Offstreet, we're now able to enable our internal customers to manage their own guest parking. albeit with all the limits and constraints that we as parking services needs to put on there. But they have full control. They can issue the permits if they want. They can pass off a link to their customers if that's the method they want to go with. They can add all of those GPS mapping capabilities to the permit so they know exactly which lot to go to. Our campus is probably similar with many of y'all, where we only have one address here on campus, and it will direct you to our admin building. So getting the people to a specific lot can be very challenging. The ability to attach PDFs and maps, those reminder emails, the clean and simple user interface, like all of that goes into not only helping the the parker, but also the department. Because another aspect of this is we're usually working with a staff member in a department that is bringing these guests on the campus. Our staff don't use pay stations. They have no need to, right? They have their faculty staff permits. They're not going to pay stations. So they don't know what that experience is like. But when you give them the off-street link and you kind of walk them through how it could be used, it immediately clicks for them. They can imagine themselves doing this because they've probably done it somewhere else. And so it makes it easier for them to curtail their instructions, understand how they're going to explain this to the guests that they're bringing on. Investigating every touch point, kind of going back to that long convoluted process, I can even back up a little bit more. My customer service coordinator is the one that manages a lot of these event parking requests, and she's dealing with the forms and the back and forth with the client and just lessening the workload for her in terms of, hey, this department can now manage their own parking. That's one less department sending her 15 Adobe signs every single day, right? And so does it make it easy for her? Does it make it easy for the customer? Does it make it easy for enforcement, right? The way that Offstreet integrates with enforcement, the way we can see the back end of it and how it's all tied together has been very easy for us. And then does it make it things easy for the billing process? The ability to run these reports, the little subcategories that you can add on access codes. As a university campus, we have a lot of different funds, departments, account codes, class codes, all these different types of codes that we use to charge each other internally. And we can now automate that through Offstreet. And it's just one simple Excel export and a copy and paste. And again, that goes back to help out my customer service coordinator, who also does the billing for these. And then finally, translating for many use cases. So obviously bringing a guest speaker onto campus is one use case, but even within that, it could be a very high profile guest speaker, and you don't want them to even go to an Offstreet website to have to do their parking. That's fine. The department can do that internally, right? As long as they ask the guest for their license plate. Is it a larger event? Is it a recurring event? Is it more of a unique circumstance, right? Like we actually use this for some of our van pool permits. We use it for a satellite office of Cal Poly that needs staff permits to come to campus for official state business. We use it with our auxiliary organizations for their staff permits as well. And HR departments for their interviews. And every single one of these people that uses it for their very specific use case has told us this is incredibly easy and smooth. And then finally, it's all about partnerships. So we didn't really, when we first launched Offstreet, we did not push it on everybody. We didn't just say, hey, we're taking away pay station codes. This is the best solution. You know, what we really did was approached the departments and groups that really frequently utilize pay stations, that really submit a lot of the same types of events, and kind of from our lens, kind of pitched it to them and said, hey, we got this new tool. Here's how it works. Let's figure it out. And it's been almost immediate in terms of adoption, right? And then we're kind of relying on word of mouth to spread across these other departments and saying, hey, I get to use Offstreet and manage my own parking. You know, maybe you should try it, because there's definitely departments on campus that are used to what they're used to. They've been using pay station codes for decades. They are fine with the process. They know the whole Adobe sign, process. For them, it's easy, right? They know it's a two-step process. They know it takes some time. They plan ahead. They order more than they need. They've kind of got their system down. So they're a little weary of trying new technology, right? Especially because on campus, not even within parking services, there are a lot of technology services and software platforms that you can use. So meeting with them internally, having these conversations, allowing them to test it, and really trying to organically onboard them has been really important for us. But even before we did that, right, we engaged with the university cashier's office to make sure that we're billing these departments the right way. We met with accounts receivables and payables to make sure that what we're submitting as backup for the charges across these campuses would be sufficient. And so earning the buy-in of all of these different stakeholders that play some part of event parking has really been important for us. And then enforcement, talking to the parking officers and saying, hey, we have these new off-street permits that are out. This is what it comes up like when it's a hit, or, and asking them, does it make sense for you? Did we label these permits the right way? If you were to see this permit, do you understand where they were supposed to park? As opposed to where they actually did. Because for sponsored guests and things like that, we do understand that our campus is complicated, and we'd like to avoid citing them if possible. So does this give you the enough context and information to do that? And they all said yes. So engaging with our partners, both internally and externally, to see if it's the right fit, and then being okay if they still want to go with reserved spaces or pay station codes or whatever other tool that we have. So with all that being said, I will post my contact information in the chat if anyone wants to reach out personally and just talk through some of the problems you have. And I really want to thank Spencer and the Off Street team for having me here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Takuto. That was awesome. So I know we're coming up on time here. We've got about 5 minutes left. I think we're going to go a little bit long. Feel free to stick around if you can. I'll throw this back up on screen. It's just our guest experience audit. If you didn't have a chance to scan it before, we'll throw that into the chat, a link to that as well. If you happen to miss it today, you can always shoot one of us a message and we'll pass it along to you. But I would like to open it up to Q&A. Taylor's going to be running this for us. She's our Q&A czar. So if you have any questions for Takuto, Emma, myself, Taylor, feel free to throw those in the chat. And without further ado, Taylor, if you want to share with us our first question.
Yeah, for sure. It looks like we have had actually a lot of questions answered already in the chat. So anything else out there that you guys want to know, please throw it into the chat, or we have the Q&A at the bottom there. We'd love to hear from you.
Question for everyone. If there aren't any questions coming in yet, just out of curiosity, what do you guys find, like, why do you want to prioritize your guest experience, or like can you give us some context into what you were hoping to get out of today? Was it to learn more about Off Street? Was it to learn how you can improve either how you're issuing permits, providing directions, communicating instructions? Is there anything kind of in particular that drew you here today? If you don't have any questions, I'll throw one at you.
And if it was just to hang out with us, that's cool too.
Yeah, we'll take that. That's actually the best answer. Coupon codes.
Cool.
Shannon, we miss you.
All right. So Alexis, can I see the process for how a department would set up an ongoing parking access code? Perhaps the best route of action here, Alexis, is to put your contact information in the chat and one of us will reach out to you.
One thing I'll mention on that, Alexis, though, real quick, we actually go through an entire process of setting up a service level agreement with each of these departments, where we actually outline like, hey, here's, what you're getting, because we also don't want to overcomplicate it for our departments and giving them like, hey, do you want a 2-hour guest parking option, a 4-hour guest parking option, a whole day? We want to give them those options, but then they kind of pick which ones they want. We even also offer the option to turn in or exchange uses of their pay station codes. So if they have like 10 uses on their pay station code that they already prepaid for, and they want to exchange those, we'll waive the first 10 uses of their off street. And so a lot of that, we didn't want to leave in just verbal or email communication. So we actually set all of this up ahead of time. We meet with them, we train them, we get the list of the department contacts that are going to be having access to the backend system, outline some of our rules and regulations just in case, and then go from there. So I'd be happy to share that with you as well.
Awesome. And thank you, Michael, for your chat there, to see what was new and what we may have missed. If there is anything else, Michael, that you feel like we didn't touch on today, please feel free to reach out to one of us. Alternatively, you can also put your contact information in the chat and we can reach out to you as well. All right. And question from Karen, what registration settings are used to ignore the first 10 parks if they have remaining coupon codes?
Yeah, it's a great question. Our coupon codes are used for all day, 1 day sponsored guest permits through our pay station. And so they're only exchangeable for that registration setting. That did come up when somebody wanted to equate that to be like, well, can I use 12 2-hour ones? But we wanted to keep it easy and they were still appreciative.
All right.
Alrighty.
Anyone else?
While we're waiting for any other questions to come in, we have one last poll for those that are remaining on the call. Seeing as we're going to be doing these on a more recurring basis, we'd love to hear what particular topics that you want to have us focus on. That way we can get some experts on that topic and then put together another one of these. So feel free to vote. I see Sid's already thrown that up. Cast your vote and enter in any last questions that you might have, so that we can tackle those here and then we'll wrap up.
Perfect. And thanks for the poll, you guys. Another question from Cristobal. If an off-street link is sent to a customer to self-register and the customer forwards the links to friends attending the event, but not VIP, will the link allow a non-VIP to register? What are the features to ensure that my VIP guests have the ability to register and not miss out due to shared links? This one on?
I can jump in. Just from our perspective,
sure.
We not from the off-street software platform perspective, but we get around that by putting, like, if it's really that concerning for our department, they're worried about it being forwarded around. We actually utilize a pre-pooled list of access codes that can only be used once. So that's how we kind of get around that.
Thanks, Takuda. Anyone else have some last minute burning questions?
I don't have a question, but just also to piggyback off of Takuda's response there, Cristobal, this is like probably one of the biggest concerns that gets flagged with us, which is just like, how do we ensure that it's not being shared, that it's not being abused? And once, like to Takuda's point, once we actually roll out, we don't really hear a lot of feedback that it is being sent around. So we have implemented some features to help with this, like codes and restricting like how many can register under that code, the times that it's active, etc. But then it's also just in the guest's best interest not to share it, because if it's capped, they're just limiting, they're reducing their own chances of having a spot left. So yeah, it's a totally fair concern. We just haven't found that once it's rolled out that it's actually been that big of an issue. But if I'm going to eat these words and somebody's had a lot of issues that's in attendance today, put that in the chat, let us know.
And to that as well. Okay, we're good there.
You would be able to program your own codes, Cristobal. So if you wanted them to like match codes you had set up for meters or pay stations, they could hypothetically, but it's a separate system. So you would set different codes.
Anyone else? You are so welcome. Thank you.
Alrighty. Okay, well, thank you all. John, it is our pleasure, wholeheartedly. Thank you all for joining us for July's Changemaker Club. I hope you all learned something and have something to take away from today. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to shoot any of the Off-Street gang or Takudo a message, and we're more than accessible. If you have ideas on future content that you want us to talk about, please follow up with that as well. But I want to thank you all from the Off-Street team. A dear thank you for coming out today and hanging out with us for this hour. So appreciate you all.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
Thanks, Takudo.